access the podcast of OA. Located deep within Sector 14845 and powered by the Emerald Light of Will, the podcast of OA is your guide to the Green Lantern universe. Hosted by Lantern Myron Rumsey, the podcast of OA begins now.
Friends, thanks for tuning in and joining us for the podcast of OA, episode number 160. I am your host, Myron Rumsey, joining you from across the universe, joined by our good buddy, Phil Bova. Phil, how is life treating you in this strange new dynamic where there's no new comics every week?
Well, I don't like the whole new comics every week, but given the circumstances, I understand. And, I hope that fans out there can be patient, and I think they are, and I think they will be. And I think that we need to all be united behind this because, it's probably going to take place for a little time now. And I just think we all need to be patient. Otherwise, I'm doing great here in the Midwest. Everything's fine.
Thanks for joining me and doing this as a weekly podcast for a while we go through these unprecedented times, because I think it's important for us to try to provide some content out there and maybe provide a welcome diversion from the real world.
And it's fun, I was looking forward to it, when we had talked about doing a weekly one. It's like, we changed the format up a little bit just to offer something nuanced to the fans, and and it gives us a chance to talk and catch up, Myron, and gives us a chance to talk to all the fans out there. And it's like you said, it's a welcome distraction given the circumstances surrounding us, and I hope it adds some levity to their lives.
I hope so. So these episodes hopefully will be a little bit shorter. I know our last one was longer than usual for one that I was saying was going to be shorter, but hopefully these episodes will be a little shorter and give people a little injection of escapism as we continue our series of You Are the Core interviews with different Green Lantern fans. And so we've got a good one lined up tonight with a friend of yours named Bryan. And then we've got some listener feedback that we held back from the last episode because we did go a little long, and so we've got quite a bit of listener feedback. All of it is from the same person, though, so that'll be fun. And you and I are getting ready to record with our good friends over on the Lantern Cast.
Yeah, that's gonna be a good time. It's gonna be fun to hear from them guys and hear how they're doing and coping through this crisis on Infinite Earth. And, just seeing how everybody's doing and in meeting together as fans and talking, it just, I don't know, it gives a special feeling to me because it's like, we get to talk about stuff and see how everybody's doing and, and how everybody's handling things and to offer some hope to those maybe, are not provided that much hope, depending on where you are. But, there's light and it's Green Lanterns and we'll get there.
Yep. Ched Mark always do a State of the Green Lantern Union episode, and they have had you and I on for the past couple of years, and I was on doing it before with them, and it's always fun to talk about Green Lantern, and we have differing opinions, but we also have very similar opinions on things, so it's always fun to talk about things and get to hear somebody else's perspective and so on. So I'm really looking forward to that. That will probably delay the release of this episode a little bit because tomorrow night would be the night I would be editing our recording from tonight, this evening, and instead I'm going to be with you and talking with them, so it might delay it a little bit. In terms of Green Lantern news, there's really not a whole lot going on. One thing I did read just recently is that DC is halting the production on a number of the 5G books and Black Label, and some of it is a reevaluation of where they're going to go, and they were doing that before, but obviously with Diamond ceasing publication and them still trying to figure out what they're going to do for books, they've slowed down the production on a number of things. But Black Label has some implications for Far Sector, because Far Sector is going to be printed under Black Label instead of, I think it's, what's the imprint they're doing now, Phil? Do you remember? What it's called?
Young Animals or
Young Animals. That's what it was.
Yeah.
It's flipping over to the Black Label, and so and it was already announced that it was going to be bi-monthly, I think starting in June. So I don't know whether this will slow things down or not. at all. Probably not, because it's a bi-monthly book, and I've got to assume they've got enough issues under their belts, so to speak, for an extended schedule. So we'll see what happens there. I hope it doesn't impact the release of that book for those people that are really enjoying it.
And this, I hate to say this, but I mean, it's an unfortunate time that we're living in and navigating through. But given the circumstances, this may help DC to DC's advantage, given the whole influx situation that they're dealing with 5G and all this reevaluating and whatever it is they're doing. So it might give them all a chance to step back and reapproach the issue and figure out what is best to do moving forward. As far as the Black Label thing, I don't know why Far Sector would be moved over to that. I mean, I did mention in the last episode, or one of our episodes, that it was interesting that it's a Young Animal imprint and she dropped the F-bomb in there, and I thought that was kind of weird. I was like, well, I didn't know what to make of it, but I don't know if maybe something came out of that and they were like, this is more adult oriented. We should probably move it over to Black Label, which is more an adult label. I mean, who can tell, and who knows who makes these decisions? But I mean, maybe this will give them all the DC people a chance to reset and move in the right direction.
Yeah, I think it might be a good idea to take this advantage of having the time to rethink 5G, because there's certainly been I don't want to say fan backlash, but there's been some criticism by fans who really don't want to see all the characters replaced, and you have that going on while Dan Didio has been let go by DC Comics. It gives Jim Lee and those other folks that are in charge a chance to kind of pull back and take a deep breath and figure out what they want to do and how they want to do what they were planning, and maybe how they want to change it to meet what the fan reactions have been so far. I don't know, but we'll see. All right. Well, let's take a quick pause, and when we come back, we will be interviewing Bryan in our next section on You Are the Core.
This is Salak, Green Lantern of Sector 1418, and you are receiving the podcast of Oa.
The podcast of Oa.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back. And tonight we have a special guest, one of my good friends and partners in crime, Bryan Graves from the glorious Fairview Heights, Illinois, just right across the river from me here in St. Louis. Bryan, man, welcome to the show. I'm glad I can get you on here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. You've been trying for a while.
I have. I really have. And, I got to say to all the fans out there that Bryan took a step into Green Lantern in the right way, and he wasn't reluctant, and he went full on, and it's been fun talking to a new fan about the Green Lantern stuff. So he's going to offer some really good insight into being a new reader.
I'm interested in hearing Bryan's take on things as someone who's really new to the Green Lantern mythology.
Yeah.
Sure. So, surprise, surprise, Phil's the one who got me into Green Lantern. He recommended me to read Rebirth one day, and so I searched it out, picked it up, and I really enjoyed it. And so I started listening to your podcast, picking up on what was happening during the Venditti run. Never really started reading it because I felt like I was too far behind to get into it, but then once Venditti's run stopped and Grant Morrison started picking the book up, I decided that would be my launching on point. And for the whole first season, I really enjoyed it. Can't say the same for the second season so far, but I'm trusting Grant Morrison is gonna have it all be leading somewhere. It's gonna pay off. But yeah, really, Phil was just the dude who got me into reading Green Lantern. I picked up, before all this coronavirus stuff really kicked off, I picked up the Blackest Night trade, and plan on reading that while I'm kind of stuck at home.
Oh, that's such a good read. You're going to just engulf that. It's so fun. One of my faves.
Oh, I was just like, yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
It'll be interesting. I'd love to hear your take after you get done reading it, because you will have been jumping in towards the end of the Jeff Johns run without all the buildup. So I want to see how that story, how that feels to you if you don't have all the stuff that comes into it. And now, did you read a lot of DC before reading Green Lantern, or were you primarily a Marvel guy? Or
I I am a major Marvel guy. I grew up in a super small town where we didn't like have any comic book shops. One year, our local grocery store started picking up comics, and they only picked up DC during the New 52. So the first actual floppies I bought was Batman Court of Owls, and then didn't really pick up too much other than a trade here or there. And then once I moved to Fairview Heights and started hanging out with Phil, they got me back into my comic book shop, and I'm really a big X-Men fan, so this Hickman X-Men run, I've just been picking up every single issue that comes out, and it's been really good. If anybody's interested in X-Men, definitely check that out.
Yeah, you're a big Hickman fan. That's who I was talking about with Myron off mic. I couldn't remember his name. I was like, yeah, he's big into this author on X-Men, and he always rants and raves about him. And, it's kind of like Myron and I with Johns or Venditti. I mean, I loved Venditti's run, so it's kind of in comparison. Everybody has their own authors that they like, and it's a culmination of their work. And, but that said, Grant's writing is a little bit different, and I think you'd probably agree with that, right?
Yeah, definitely. After starting to pick up Grant Morrison's run on Green Lantern, it finally pushed me to read his run on All New X-Men, which I've always been against because the art is just atrocious. But I love his storytelling and hope to see where this all ends up going.
You and I, Myron, have talked a lot about, well, we haven't really talked a lot about season 2, but when we did start talking about it, you and I, well, I'll go back to season 1. You and I were hesitant at first for the first few issues. I remember the early episodes. We were kind of like, we weren't sure what to take of it. And then it started picking up speed. And, of course, here we are again in year 2, and it's kind of the same dynamic, because I know we talked about the first issue was a little, kind of didn't know what to make of it or whatnot, but it hasn't really picked up speed just yet.
Agreed. It's definitely a little slower. And that second issue in particular, I think was difficult for a lot of people. Especially someone like yourself, Bryan, who's still relatively new, to grab some of that stuff. Now, does it bother you at all when you see characters and there's probably a backstory to these things, but you don't know what they are? Does that ever take away from your enjoyment of the issues?
It depends on how central to the plot that thing is. If it becomes like a major role in the story, then I'll do a little bit of research. But if it's just like a passing thing, like, oh, this guy exists, here's what he does, then I'm just fine with accepting that and moving on.
That's actually a really good way to look at it, though.
True. That'll be one of the things that'll be interesting as you read Blackest Night, because a lot of that is based on knowing the history of the characters and why it's shocking to see some of the things that take place, especially a lot of the characters that come back that from DC's history that have been not on the printed page for a while up until that moment.
Sounds like I got a lot of research ahead of me.
Now, Bryan, does any particular character or story have any significance to you since you started reading Green Lantern?
I'd love to tell you yes, but honestly, for me right now, it's kind of just a nice little escape, a nice little form of entertainment that I can sink 15, 20 minutes into at a time, and nothing like super sappy, unfortunately. But yeah, I've been enjoying reading it for the most part, and I hope that I develop some sort of connection with some character here, but as of right now, it's just a really cool narrative.
So, did you approach comics from I have a favorite character and I want to read about that character, or do you follow creators?
A little bit of both. So the main thing that I follow as far as Marvel is concerned is X-Men. And with X-Men, I've just picked up on Hickman. So I've gone back, gotten Hickman's Fantastic Four trade. So if I find a writer that just seems like exceptional, I tend to look into more of their stuff. I've gotten that way with Chip Zdarsky, who's currently writing Daredevil over at Marvel. Picked up his Spider-Man life story, and it's just as good. And Donny Cates has been really good on Venom, so I picked up his Image book, Redneck, which is also solid. So my main thing is I tend to pick up books with characters I recognize, and then based off of the writer in those, if I really enjoy what they're doing, I'll go to seek out more of their material.
Now, Bryan did bring up an interesting point to me the other day in a text message about if the Green Lantern Corps ever had to face off against the X-Men. And if you go back, to the original uniforms, they do have yellow in them. So I fear that the X-Men may be triumphant, but I say that lightly because I don't want to tick off too many of my fans out there.
If I remember correctly, you were the one who was wanting the two groups to square off, and I just had to let you know how it'd go.
I think it'd be an interesting crossover. That's for sure.
Sure. Yeah, I'm hoping with all these rumors going around and all these writers backing it, that we'll see another DC Marvel crossover for too long.
Yeah, I just wonder if that's where they're kind of moving towards with this break and everything like that. I mean, trying to give something the fans really, really yearn for, because that Amalgam Comics, when they did that crossover event, I guess that was in the 90s, wasn't it, Myron?
Yeah, I want to say that was 90s.
Yeah, I mean, that was big. That was huge. And I remember at the end of all those issues writing in and, voting for who you think would win or whatnot, and just waiting for the results for the next issue to come out. And I thought that was a really, really cool, genuinely nuanced idea that the comic book publishers did. And it'd be kind of fun if they decided to do something similar to that this time around.
Are you saying that the readers would vote for who they wanted to win, and then the writers would take that, or they probably have separate stories written out, and based on the reader polls, that's how they decide what would happen? Or am I mishearing that?
I think that's what, when they voted last time, I almost remember it was like I don't know if it was like a couple part issue or something like that, and then you had to vote, you had to write in a vote, and then I guess, I don't know if they had both issues already played out on who would win or what, and the voter poll would basically be the premise on which one was published. I don't know how that worked back then. I just remember voting at the time and doing the write-ins or whatnot, because back then you didn't have social media, not like it is now. So I'm not sure how they went about that. I'd have to look into that more, but I remember that's how it went down, though. I don't know if you remember much of that, Myron.
No, I left comics for a while in the 90s, and I know I missed some of that stuff. I know there was the Marvel, DC versus Marvel crossover, and then there was the amalgam stuff where you had characters that were an amalgam of a DC character and a Marvel character. So for Green Lantern, it was Green Lantern crossed with Iron Man, and it was a character called Iron Lantern. Remember there was Dark Claw that was Wolverine and Batman combined together, and
that's right. And then Captain America was crossed with Superman. I think it was Superman at the time.
Yeah, I don't remember.
That's been a long time ago.
Yeah, but it seems like it's time for a crossover, and boy, it would be certainly a nice way to give a shot in the arm to the comic book industry coming out of this whole situation we're in right now.
Absolutely, yeah. They're definitely going to need something to help them pick up those lost sales.
Right. Speaking of which, and I know the answer to this, but some of our listeners don't. Do you read your comics digitally, or do you prefer hard copies from your local comic book shop?
Oh, I'm hard copies all the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I can get a hold of them, that's my preferred method.
It's the way to go, man. It's the way to go.
So you say you're quite an X-Men fan. What about the X-Men attracts you to them?
I guess it's the diversity, just the idea of teams is interesting to me rather than focusing on one central character all the time. It kind of keeps the book fresh. And there's just somebody in there that anybody can relate to. The character I feel like I relate to most would be Nightcrawler. I grew up Catholic, kind of an outcast, so he just always kind of drew me to him.
What did you think of his portrayal in the movies?
Not really to the character, from what I've read. But it's not appalling, really. I didn't really care for the new Nightcrawler portrayals in Dark Phoenix and Apocalypse, but I enjoyed his representation in X2. It's weird having him be all scarred all over, but the Catholic guilt was really heavy there, and I related.
Yeah, I thought that Alan Cummings did a great job as Nightcrawler in the movie. Really made you feel for the character in terms of his persecution.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
If I had a favorite X-Men, I haven't read X-Men in a long time, but Nightcrawler was always my favorite as well.
It's a good choice. It's a good, solid choice.
I was a Gambit fan. I liked Gambit.
We won't hold that against you, Phil.
That's okay.
Somebody has to be. Somebody has to be.
A lot of our listeners probably hold against me that I can't stand Simon Baz, so that's okay. It's fair.
I've been trying to get you to read Excalibur here lately since Gambit's in there, but you just refuse, man.
I'm getting caught up. I've been doing a lot of reading lately. I just read, and I don't know if I told you this, Myron. I know this is a Lantern podcast, but I just read a run that it was called The Serpent War, and it had Conan, Moon Knight, Solomon Kane, and Dark Agnes in there. And I'll say it was a 4-part series that I was really, 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 really impressed with.
Sounds cool.
It was really cool. The crossover elements were really neat, and all the characters worked really, really well together, even though they don't go together. And the humor between Moon Knight and Solomon Kane, which, you know, he's this guy with this multiple personalities, and Solomon Kane's this Puritan on a quest for God's righteousness. It was really, really interesting how the interplay was.
So, Bryan, most comic book fans have a pretty sizable collection of collectibles and toys and comics and so on. Do you have something that is in your collection of things that's your favorite item or issue?
Yeah, I have the Nightcrawler 4-part miniseries from the 80s. I have bagged and boarded up on a little shelf with a Nightcrawler figure standing right in front of it. My little shrine to Kurt.
That's cool. That's cool.
Everybody's got to have their little shrines, man.
That's right.
Myron's got a whole museum.
Oh, I
bet. I've been collecting for a long, long time.
Oh boy.
I was counting my long boxes the other day, and I've got 18 long boxes.
Are you kidding me?
No, I'm not.
That's it, Myron. You're my new hero, man. That's impressive.
Yeah, that makes my half a long box and 2 short boxes pale in comparison.
But I have every book I've ever bought. Short of a few I might have sold, and I've started reading when I was like 6 years old, 7 years old. So my collection goes back almost 50 years.
Well, you got to have some gems hidden there.
It's funny. My sister had a boyfriend who was big into comics, and he knew I loved comics when I was little as well. And he, being about 7 years, 8 years older than me, was getting rid of his collection, and he gave them all to me and my brother. And so my brother and I kind of sorted them all out by character and picked out things like I grabbed all the Spider-Mans and all the Green Lanterns and the Justice Leagues and so on. And in some of those issues was the first appearance of the Punisher, the death of Gwen Stacy, some great books.
Wow. That's awesome.
I don't think he knew what he had.
He must not have. I mean, that Death of Gwen Stacy is a landmark issue, man.
Oh yeah.
And some of those people don't know what they have. I mean, they give it away. But I mean, to be quite honest with you, who has the time to go through all your comic books to sit there and sort out what's worth it and what's not, you know, and then have to take the time to go get it appraised and then to sell it. I mean, not a lot of people have the time for that.
No, grading them all and bagging them, and if you use regular propylene bags, they only last so many years. So you kind of have to rebag things after a while too if you don't go with the archival stuff.
Sure.
But I have a lot of comics that don't have covers. Back in the day, Phil, you might remember this because you're about the same age as me, a bit younger. But you used to be able to buy bagged comics without covers on them. And you'd have like a bag of 5 or 6 of them, and you'd only see the front covers of 2 issues, and you wouldn't know what was in the center.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do remember those. I think they got kickbacks for those or something like that. I think the publishers got, I don't know, they got credit for the book, and then they sold them cheap in box sets or something like that. I'm not sure how that worked back then.
Yeah, I think they used to be able to send the covers back for credit.
That's what it was. Yeah.
And then they would take the stuff and bag them, and then you'd get like a Spider-Man or an X-Men or something cool on the outside, and the center would be Richie Rich and Archie Comics.
The old bait and switch.
Yes, exactly. It's funny. I'll tell you a story. I grew up. Most of my comics were that way because my parents were not. We were really poor growing up, and I was very sickly as a kid, and so my parents would buy a lot of comics for me so I could have something to read at home. So I didn't realize DC and Marvel were 2 different companies. I thought they were all the same. So I never understood why the Avengers and the Justice League didn't team up, or why you didn't see Batman and Spider-Man teaming up, or any of those kind of things at all. I grew up completely oblivious until maybe I was 12.
And isn't it funny looking back in those times too, how much of a taboo it was when you were a comic book reader, and people made fun of us, and I remember being made fun of, and so I'd hide it a lot, or I didn't tell anybody a lot of my passions reading and stuff like that. And then you fast forward years later, and it started to gain more momentum to where that cultural shift was taking place. And you look back on those times and say, you know what? I wish I could go back and tell all those a-holes I told you so, and how cool I was then and how cool I am now.
Bryan, when did you start reading?
Like I said, I'd pick up a trade every now and then, either from like the school book fair, or if I happened to be in town where there was a comic shop. But the first time, like I said, that I really started buying floppies was whenever New 52 started in my local grocery store. Got Court of Owl's storyline of Batman. It didn't last too long after that because they stopped selling them. But so whatever year that was, I guess I couldn't tell you.
So you're not only new to Green Lantern, but you're new to comics in general.
Yeah, kind of. In like grade school, like I said, our little school's book fairs would sell comics. I get like a little trade of Spider-Man or something. But as for like continually reading, fairly new to it. Yeah.
I remember my first comic book I ever picked up was Marvel's G.I. Joe #1. I think that was like 1981 or 82, if I'm not mistaken. I'd have to look it up, but that was the first one I picked up. That was on one of the little circular metal racks at our local shop up there in Fairview.
Very cool. All right, Bryan. Well, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your love of comics and X-Men and your intro to Green Lantern.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Not a problem. You take it easy. Hope you enjoy Blackest Night. We need to report back after you get done with Blackest Night.
All right, I'll do that.
All right, Bryan. We'll talk to you soon, buddy.
Yep, take it easy, Phil. See ya.
Right, yeah.
What up, dweebs? This is Guy Gardner. You're listening to the podcast of OA.
Well, Phil, it was great to talk to your buddy Bryan. He sounds like a cool guy.
Yeah, real nice guy, and it was really cool of him to get himself involved with Green Lantern. I mean, I know he's a Marvel reader, and we all have our likes, and and I appreciate everybody's likes. Whether I agree with it or not, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's like me with Simon Baz. I appreciate Simon Baz, and I appreciate the fans that like him. Just because I don't doesn't mean I'm not a fan. It just means I don't like a particular character. And Bryan's no different. He's a big Spidey fan, and I'm not a huge Spider-Man fan. And, he likes X-Men, and I like the X-Men. I like certain characters. But I got more time invested in DC than I have Marvel. And a lot of times when I start reading Marvel stuff, I kind of feel like I'm a little lost because I don't have a lot vested in the characters. And you could probably relate to that with some of the books that you've read.
Absolutely. I used to be a big Marvel guy as well. Probably at one time I was probably a little more Marvel than I was DC. But I got to a point where right around the time of the Spider-Man clone saga, I kind of decided, I can't afford to keep up with two different universes, and they're getting more and more entrenched with each other in these shared universes. I'm gonna pick one, and as much as I loved Spider-Man, I loved Green Lantern more. So that was why I decided to just put both feet into the DC universe rather than spread my time. And I still read other things on and off. I tend to read a lot more independent stuff though these days than anything else when I'm reading non-DC stuff.
Yeah, I do the same thing. Some of those independent comics are really, really, really good.
So we've got some listener feedback. So let me read the first one. And this is from Daniel. And Daniel is commenting about Green Lantern Season 2, Issue number 2. And Daniel says, I found this issue a little difficult to get through. I know it mentions that the Orintho men's scream was messing with the speech centers and it was a part of the story, but the dialogue was so odd and unnatural that it was difficult to trudge through. I'm not sure why it needed to be in there other than as some throwback to Silver Age writing. I also found the pacing very choppy this issue. Morrison is definitely taking an interesting approach to Hal. Even beyond missing the wonders of space, Hal seems to want to avoid being tied down by his past history and relationships on Earth. He's preferring the casual in and outgoing with Eve as opposed to anything real. In space, he's the Green Lantern. On Earth, he is just Hal. It'll be interesting to see if Morrison will have a larger character arc with Hal reconciling the adrenaline junkie space cop side of himself with his connections on Earth. It will be an interesting ride either way. And Daniel, I agree. That second issue was tough, and I had to reread it a couple times, not because of the usual dense Morrison storytelling, but because the dialogue was so off. And thinking back on it, I don't know why it needed to be an essential part of the story, because it didn't really pan out to anything. And when I go back and look at the original stuff, the Arento Men, I don't recall that being a big part of it. So I agree with you. I don't think that was Morrison's best effort. As much as I like his run overall, that one to me definitely was not one of the better things. And how he reconciles Hal the Green Lantern versus Hal the Man, I think that's a big part of this entire series. One of the things I saw in an interview with Morrison was that he was talking about how Hal loves Earth, but when he comes back to Earth, he's reminded of all the problems that holds Earth down. When he's out in space, he sees the wonders of species who've gotten their act together and how great it is. And even though he maybe misses emotionally his home, I think he's disheartened by what he sees enough that he kind of pushes away, is the way that his take is on it. I mean, do you agree with that, Phil, or do you think something different?
I've always felt Hal had a disconnect with Earth. I mean, sure, it's his home and it's a place that he goes back to, but all the stuff I've ever read, it just seems like he meshes well when he's out doing his own thing, because for lack of a better words, he's his own person. He's his own character. And when Renegade took place, that kind of fueled it a little bit more for me, because it just felt like he is that renegade Green Lantern that does his own thing, and he does it well. And I've always felt like Earth was an anchor point for him, and it kept him grounded. And he doesn't seem like the type of character that I've read over the course of the years that can be held down in a particular place for a long extended period of time.
I agree. So Phil, the other comment we got is from Daniel as well. Would you like to read that one?
Yeah. So Daniel says, I just wanted to drop a quick note to say thanks for continuing to do the podcast. It really is a high point of the day to just listen to some comic talk and general positivity. Some days we can be surrounded by negativity and people consistently pecking at others and focusing on the negative. It is nice to see that the positive message of superheroes in comics is still alive and well, and inspiring people to overcome the adversity and continue to help others. The will to rise above is definitely a good message for the times. I just wanted to let you guys know that you are doing this in a vacuum. Your listeners appreciate it, and brightest day. He goes on to say, I also wanted to say, I can appreciate the continued humor of everyone having their favorite GL and poking fun at others. But in the same vein as positivity, remember they are all someone's favorite. I first started reading GL when Kyle was his last torchbearer, and he is still my favorite. There are several good stories to review during that era. A few that come to mind are Kyle's first fight with Nero, when Kyle's assistant came out as gay, and the later issue where he is beaten up because of it, and the issue where Kyle consults with Superman and reunites with his father before giving up the ion power to recharge the central power battery and give birth to the new Guardians. Just my 2 cents. Again, thanks for doing the podcast. We are all one big GL family. Everything you said is spot on, Daniel. And for any fans out there that know me, I have no disservice to any kind of Green Lantern whatsoever, and that's including Simon Bass, even though I got my own reservations about who I like, And the thing about the Green Lantern that I've always enjoyed the most is there's so many of them that you can like. And more importantly, if you really narrowed it down to the Earth Lanterns, there's even so many of those that you can really, really attach and find yourself liking more and more and more. And much to like Daniel says, I first started reading a lot of Green Lantern stuff with Kyle Rayner in mind. And I'll be honest with you, I really, really enjoy Kyle Rayner, but he's always taken a second seat to Hal Jordan. And and then close to third would be Guy Gardner, and then maybe Jon Stewart and others that follow. But the Green Lantern universe has shifted in so many ways over the course of the years, and and now I'm a big fan of Jessica Cruz, and she's way up there with Hal Jordan, and but I think a lot of that has to do with a disconnect from not being able to read your favorite Lantern for a long extended period of time. We haven't had a lot of Kyle Rayner stories recently, other than the fact that he was an Omega Man for a while, and we don't know a lot what's going on with these guys. So when they're taken off the playing field for so long, and you don't have anything to fill that vacuum, you kind of distance yourself from the characterization and you attach yourself onto somebody else, and sometimes things will surprise you. And I knew when Jessica Cruz was first being mentioned that I knew I was going to like her, because I was looking forward to a new take on a Green Lantern from Earth, and I liked her struggles and I liked what she's overcome and what she went through. But I mean, he's right. And in that vein, I want all of the fans out there to know who listen to me that it's all in good humor, and I mean nothing personal by it whatsoever. And I will never, ever, ever trounce on anybody else's passions. Just know that in the same vein, I can't stand Batman. I never will like him. But I love every single fan out there that does love Batman. I'm not that guy, and but I can appreciate him enough to know that he is a main character that drives the DC universe to what it is today. And all the films and everything that he's done have been great. Michael Keaton was awesome, and I even liked Val Kilmer. I even liked George Clooney, for that matter. I wasn't a big fan of Christian Bale, but I loved Ben Affleck's version. But things can surprise you, and I'm still here to this day at 46, and things will continue to surprise me. And who knows, maybe in some Green Lantern's light somewhere, Simon Baz will come back, and maybe I'll find a different liking for him. Who knows?
It's hard to say.
I loved all his comments, man. This guy sounds like a great guy, and I'd love to have him on the show sometime.
It's funny, back in the day when Bill and I were recording the initial episodes, Bill he did not like Guy Gardner. He hated Guy Gardner, absolutely hated him. And over time he began to start to like him a little bit. And we did, we were doing these segments where we were trying to provide information about characters to new readers. And so I would give Bill a mini biography of the character, and then he would flex his creative muscles and write a script as though we were doing a mock interview. And then we would record this mock interview, and his brother, who's an actor, would record the voice of the other characters. In fact, when you hear some of the bumpers, when you hear Guy Gardner and you hear Salak, those are both Bill's brother. And so we decided to do one on Guy Gardner. We were struggling with what character to do. And I said to Bill, wouldn't it be funny if we tried to call into Oa? We pretended we were Skyping Oa. Wouldn't it be funny if Guy Gardner intercepted the call because he was tired of you ragging on him every episode? and Bill took it and ran with it. And that we had to edit that so bad because his brother was, they're real life brothers. And so there's that dynamic added to it. And he was just taking the snot out of Bill and I. And he was ad-libbing. It was great, but we had to edit the bejeebers out of that segment. But we all have our likes and our dislikes. And for me, I think I don't want to say dislike of the newer characters is I dislike the thought that we're watering down a concept to add characters that dilute the overall product. Like, I don't like having all these different Flashes. Same reason. I don't like having all these different Green Lanterns from Earth because it takes away from the alien Green Lanterns. And part of this was being unique and being the only representative of Earth. And we're only supposed to have 2 per sector. And, writers are creating along and, well, if I can't come up with a new creative concept, let me give a Green Lantern give a Green Lantern ring to a new character idea I've got, and bingo, I've got a brand new character. And I think it's a disservice to the franchise. That's my 2 cents. I'm not enthused by a lot of the new characters. I'll be completely honest. I just think it's gotten too big, and because we don't have enough books, not at all the characters get the spotlight they deserve, and then you have fans that feel So anyway, another comment from Daniel, and he's talking about our last episode that we just did. And he said, awesome show as always, gentlemen. Love the new segment. It is always a pleasure to hear from fellow fans. I wish Apotheosis was in my neck of the woods. It seems like a great shop. Definitely can't go wrong with comics and beer. You have talked about the Hal Specter series a couple of times now. I will have to check it out. Cheers, guys. Thanks again for the fun conversation and escapism. And Daniel, thank you for taking time out of your day to give us your feedback and your comments and stimulate some conversation, because that really helps us. And, when we, you in an earlier comment, you talked about not being in a vacuum. Sometimes it almost feels like we're in a vacuum because, we have Phil and I talking to each other, and then unless we get feedback, we don't know whether we're reaching our audience. Are we ticking them off? Do they like what we're having to say? So we love it when anybody takes the time out of their day to be a part of the show this way. And like you, I wish Apotheosis was in my neck of the woods too, because beer and comics and board games and stuff, that would be just perfect for me. I live in a very rural part of New York State, and I have one comic shop within a half an hour radius, a half an hour drive from me. And it's your traditional comic shop. I love Heroes Your Mouth Throat Comics, but it's your traditional comic shop. I love to see an upscale, pub lounge type of environment. It would be great. I would just love something like that. So I appreciate that. And the Hal Specter series is worth checking out. It's a shame it really hasn't been collected. But.
Yeah. I was going to say the same thing. I have them all digitally, and I haven't read it in quite some time. And I had actually thought about with this break that we're having to go back and revisit that myself. I was always a fan of when Hal Jordan was the Spectre. I liked the Spectre anyway with Jim Corrigan, but I liked it when Hal took the mantle. I thought it was a cool idea. I mean, it was different, but it's the same Hal Jordan. You'll pick that up when you start reading it, Daniel. You'll pick up on the Hal Jordan aspect of it. It's different, but you'll pick up on a character.
So if you would
get him on the show sometime,
yeah, it would be cool. So if you would like to leave a voicemail, we do have a voice line. The number is 406-POD of OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can leave a voicemail that way. You can join if you're on Skype. We have a Skype account called Blog of OA. You can leave us a message that way. And you can always on the website, there's always a spot to add comments and send feedback. And we would love to hear from anybody who would like to share in our love of Green Lantern stuff. So, Phil, let's pause for a minute and come back, and we'll do our closing. And then you've got something new you want to start doing. So I thought that would be a great opportunity for us to do your first installment of the Green Lantern Fun Fact.
Yeah, love it. Looking forward to it. All right, Myron. Well, here we go. I'm going to start a little something new here, and we're going to call this the Green Lantern Fun Fan Fact. And first up, I pulled this one out, and I was surprised by it at first, but not surprised because of what it revolved around. But let me read it for you guys, and we'll explain. The mayor of New York was a Green Lantern fan. In the early 1970s, readers were starting to feel that Hal Jordan's space adventures were a little far-fetched and sales on the Green Lantern comic were dropping. DC's solution was to bring him back to Earth, give him a sidekick, the Green Arrow, and have the two travel America fighting real-world issues. In one story arc, it was revealed that the Green Arrow's teen sidekick, Speedy, had become a heroin addict and had to go cold turkey before bringing down the dealers. It prompted the New York City Mayor John V. Lindsay to write a letter to DC Comics commending them on their handling of the story, which was published in a following issue. And I remember that issue, Myron. I know you probably do too, right?
Oh, yeah. Yep. It was a very famous, one of the Hard Traveling Heroes issues.
Yeah. It was people should read it. I mean, the thing about it is, like, back in the 70s, and not too much different from today, but different drug usage then. But if they had a big heroin scare going on with the war on drugs, and of course it was the 70s, you had a lot of pot smoking hippies coming off of the Vietnam War or whatnot, and it was a whole age of rock and music and stuff, and Woodstock, coming off of Woodstock and everything, and so it was an all-out assault on trying to get America to fight the real world issues. And yeah, Speedy was the drug addict. That I remember the cover was real controversial I'm not mistaken.
That was the issue where Hal is kind of accosting. I shouldn't say accosting, but he's given Green Arrow a hard time because Roy is a druggie, and he's sitting there and he's got the drugs on the table. It was a very very popular issue. I think it was issue 85 back in the day, and it was remember earlier I was talking about my sister's boyfriend that gave me a bunch of books. That was one of the books. No,
I'm kidding. That's a good one to have.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I like I said, he didn't know what he had, but yeah, it's one of the classic Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams books.
Yeah. So it's an interesting fact. I didn't know that. I came across that and I was like, huh, that's really interesting. I think a lot of Green Lantern fans should know that. You know, I don't know if their current mayor is a Green Lantern fan. He's a little busy right now, but you'll have to ask Cuomo when you get a chance.
That's cool. I think we should make that a segment in every episode, Phil. So you got some homework to do.
I do. More stuff to do. That's great.
All right, my friend. Well, tomorrow night you and I are recording with the Lantern Cast, and I can't wait to hear what we're going to talk about. And it'll be obviously our opinions on where Green Lantern is, where we want it to go, and where we think it's going to go. That's usually the conversation. So when that episode comes out, I'll make sure to promote that on our social media groups and so on, because it's always a great conversation to get the four of us together.
Yeah, it's gonna be a good time, and you know, in light of everything going on, it's gonna be another moment for us to, you know, to kick back and just talk about something fun for a change instead of, you know, all the negativity surrounding us now.
That's right. So till next week, treat each other well and keep your power rings charged. Make every day your brightest day, and we'll be back soon.
All right. We'll see you guys.
The Podcast of OA is the official podcast of the blog of OA and a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. Share your comments and questions by calling the show's voicemail line at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can send your emails to podcast@blogofOA.com. You can also find the Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA on Twitter and Facebook. Green Lantern and other related characters are the copyrighted property of DC Comics Incorporated and are used without permission. The Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA are fan productions and do not claim any ownership over the Green Lantern or any other copyrighted properties.